The church is a God-given institution that is so wonderful and so complex that God has helped us by giving us figures of speech to describe what the church is. And he's given us descriptive terms to explain more about what the church is. He's told us that the church is the body. He's told us that the church is the kingdom. He's told us that the church is the household of God. And he's also told us that the church is the temple. And that's what we're going to be studying today, the fact that today the church is the temple of God. But first we're going to go back to the Old Testament times and remember that the children of Israel were brought out of the land of Egypt by the power of God. And God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai and gave him many instructions, including detailed instructions for the building of the tabernacle. After he'd come down, he assembled the master craftsmen, and they gathered all this material and they built this wonderful structure, the tabernacle of God. And once it was completed, we read in Exodus chapter 40, verses 34 and 35, "Then the cloud covered the tent of the meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses was not able to enter the tent of the meeting because the cloud had settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle." Moving on in the history of Israel, we remember that God permitted them to have kings, and they served these kings. David wishes to build a permanent dwelling for God, not seeking it fit for God to dwell in a tent. But he wasn't permitted. It fell unto his son Solomon to build that tabernacle. And we read there in 1 Kings chapter 8, starting in verse 10, once this structure had been completed, then it happened that the priests came from the holy place. The cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priests could not stand to minister because the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. Verse 12, then Solomon said, "The Lord has said that he would dwell in the thick cloud. I have surely built you a lofty house, a place for your dwelling forever." And we move on to the New Testament time. Today we don't have a man-made structure that is the temple, but the Bible makes it clear that for us today, the church is the temple. Notice what we read when we go to the book of 1 Corinthians in chapter 3. The apostle there goes back to those master craftsmen that built the tabernacle and then the temple. And notice what we read starting in verse 10 and 11. It says there, "According to the grace of God which was given to me, like a wise master builder, I laid a foundation, and another is building on it. But each man must be careful how he builds on it. For no man can lay a foundation other than the one which is laid, which is Christ Jesus." Well, what was it that he was building? This master builder that was built on Christ Jesus. Verse 16 tells us, "Do you not know that you are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwells in you?" Today, the church is the temple of the living God. This is what Paul writes to the Ephesians, in Ephesians chapter 2, starting in verse 19. It says there, "So then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but are fellow citizens with the saints and are of God's household, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole building is being fitted together and growing into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are being built up together into a dwelling of God in the Spirit." You see, the church is not a building, a place that you go down to on the corner. The church is a group of people that gather together as the temple of God. And we worship together as the temple of God. Peter writes about this in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verses 4 and 5. We read there, "And coming to him as to a living stone," that's Jesus, which has been rejected by men, but is choice and precious in the sight of God, you also, as living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house for a holy priesthood to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Christ Jesus. Under the Old Testament system, sacrifices were offered first in the tabernacle and then in the temple. But Jesus did away with all of that. He became our sacrifice. Now today, we offer up our spiritual sacrifices in the temple of God, which is the church of the living God. If you would like to know more about the wonderful church that we read of in the Bible, why don't you put a question down in the comment section below and we'll get right back to you. Thank you once again for being with us and studying with us as we continue to look at the Bible through these videos. We look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye for now.